Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this ThinkIn, which by any measure is really something of a reunion. I see that William Jeremy, who is one of our members, has noticed that I've had a haircut. Actually, William, before we got on, I was saying to Matthew Barzun, who, as you know, is my co-founder and chairman of Tortoise, as well as many other things, that it seems that since we started this, his hair has been moving quietly forward as mine has been moving quietly back. And he tells me, very much in the spirit of your book, actually, Matthew, that if you sort of share where we've got to each follically, we're in a good place. You know, between
on average, we're fine.
On average, we're fine. Listen, welcome everyone. I started to get to know Matthew when he was the US ambassador, and our conversation started out being around politics and diplomacy and those rather formal things that you would expect a journalist to do when they come to see the ambassador. The truth is that formality didn't last very long, largely because when you walked into Winfield House, the first thing that you noticed was not actually the design and grandeur of the place, was that Squeeze was playing on the turntable. And by the time you'd got through up the junction and got over to say hello to the ambassador, you were already feeling much less formal and serious. But anyway, in the course of those conversations, we started talking about the way in which you convey ideas, the way in which journalism works. And that's how he, Katie Vanek-Smith, and I ended up trying to set up Tortoise. And there was a moment in the sort of informality and general chit chat of our relationship that we suddenly realized that Matthew was in the process of launching a book, seemingly doing a whole host of media. And we were in the process of thinking, hang on, but aren't we a newsroom? Isn't there a possibility that we could book Matthew Barzun for our own event? And so, Matthew, I appreciate that the book, when does it actually launch? Tomorrow?
It launches in the UK on Tuesday.
On Tuesday?
Sorry, a week from today.
Okay, in a week. Well, here we are with an early preview. Well, what we wanted to do was hear from Matthew about the book, hear the ideas, and as far as possible, do it in the real spirit of a thinking, Matthew, of course, which is to hear from as many members as possible. Please weigh in, message me in the chat, you know, raise your hand to speak directly to Matthew. We'd love to have an hour of proper conversation. But I'm going to start, Matthew, with two props, if you like. I very much like the way in which you've got the book there with the arrow. So we know,
yeah,
yes.
Subtle. I'm American. I mean, it's subtle. Yeah.
Here we go. Here are my two props. I'm going to start with this.
Yes.
And for those people who've not yet read the book, can you explain why this is a significant prop?
Yes. So on the back of the US $1 bill are two symbols of American strength and power. The one on the left, as you're looking at James's screen, is the pyramid. This is probably most familiar. People kind of remember this. Books have been written about it, or fictional books have been written about it. Pyramid with that little mini weird pyramid on top with the all-seeing eye. Then on the other side, this is the US seal. This is the logo of America, 1776. It took longer to design this logo than it did to win the war. But the front of the logo is on the right. You see the eagle with the shield in front of it. And then if you look above the eagle's head, this is the second symbol I want to call your attention to. If there are Americans on the line, this is on the front of our passport. And you look at it, and most of us just look through it every time. But it's a very particular symbol with a lot to offer us. And I contrast it in the book with the pyramid. So that other symbol is called the constellation. And it is the way we are supposed to make sense of our national motto, which is e pluribus unum, from many one. We are not supposed to think of it as from many bricks, one pyramid, right? Either fit in or be left out. You were supposed to think of it like a constellation, that you can be your own star and connect to other stars to make something bigger and more powerful than you could by yourself. That's how you can be at once your own distinct individual and yet part of this unified whole.
And Matthew, the argument of the book, the argument of the power of giving away power, is that the pyramid is not that, but the constellation is.
That's right. And you and I talked about this. And James, I must say, you were such an amazing friend, supporter, Sherpa, whatever, lots of different words for your process in the development of this book. So thank you. Um, I think it's more than a little ironic that in my world, in my life in diplomacy, and before that in business, and then in politics, I studiously avoided ever using the word power. And now it occurs twice in the title of my book. And I think I avoided it because I think I think lots of us have a problem with power. Because we've seen, let me just look around, you see it lorded over other people and how awful that is. You see what happens when we hoard it to ourselves. And even, although this sounds better than those two options, even the idea of sharing power, I think is not the right way to think about power. And that the leaders I talk about in this book and the leaders who've inspired me have a very different mindset about power. And they don't think power is something that it's not a scarce resource that you can like mine. It is something you make. Power is something you make, and you make it with other people.
And just
what I call a constellation as opposed to this pyramid.
And just for those people, i.e. me, who have a kind of immediate skepticism about that, that sharing power is sort of the humble bragging of leadership, that there's something often performative about it when CEOs or politicians, quote unquote, bring others into the room. How do you distinguish between that kind of what you would call bringing along, right, which is not necessarily giving away power, and what you're describing, which seems to me to really putting people in charge to come to a better outcome?
Well, that's right. I think that the skepticism is healthy and it's welcome, right? And that's actually part of the constellation mindset, which we'll get into, is the critics count. You have to count the critics, and you have to find the energy and the power that lies in our difference. But going back one step, if you say, well, okay, the pyramid is the world of top-down, command and control, barking orders from the top, we all get that. I think the trick becomes, and the trap becomes, if either because we believe or because we're told that that's no longer okay, that you say, I know, I'll do the opposite. I'll be a bottom-up leader. And this is where so much BS and pretending happens. And I think, in the case I try to make in the book, is bottom-up is no better, or it's barely better. And the reason it's no better is that if you look at the world, your organization of whatever size, as bottom-up, you are forced into one of two roles. Either you look at other people around you as beneath you, or you look at yourself as beneath someone else. And I just think that is a terrible way, either of those scenarios. It's the exact same shape. You thought you were escaping the pyramid by going bottom up. You are just running the pyramid in reverse order.
And Matthew, what do you take? It's sort of give me a break here. Your career is a story of those pyramid organizations. CNET. I'm sure there was a great deal of movement of ideas and goodwill around that organization, but it clearly had founders, it had investors, and then it had the classic structure of a tech startup and growth business. You went to work for President Obama in fundraising. The reality of a political campaign and obviously a presidency is there is someone at the top, and then there are the people beneath, and even within the State Department, right? As an ambassador, when you walk in, there's a clear sense of hierarchy. So how does your thinking about that apply to a world where actually the reality is that those hierarchies are quite baked in?
Well, if you go back to the beginning of what you said, so in my time in the .com world, all the magic and energy existed when we were open. I mean, this is sort of makes me sound very old, but this is early 1990s, and I was at a company called CNET, which was trying to be basically like a more useful computer magazine, but online. And I remember early on, we had all these people we didn't charge anything, but they were members, like Tortoise members. And we would let them write reviews of what they thought of the IBM ThinkPad laptop. And that was considered heretical. Like, yeah, but we have experts who know it. And I was like, I don't know, these people own the thing. They fly from Boston to San Francisco. They'll know whether the battery actually lasts or not. Why don't you let them share it? And that is sort of commonplace now, but it was unusual then. And so I think the good internet companies weren't pyramids. And the internet itself, and I get into this in the book, but Vint Cerf, who really did co-found or co-invent the internet, he set up this system that was weird for the time, the internet protocol. Computers talking together wasn't new, right? But the way you were supposed to do it is it was supposed to be guaranteed and binding, two computers locked in. And he made this intellectual leap of like, no, we're going to unlock it. And you're not going to have a dedicated connection. And my favorite part is it was called, in computer science lingo, it was called an unreliable infrastructure or unreliable architecture. And it went on to create the most reliable network the world has ever seen.
Yeah.
So it takes that leap of faith, which I understand for some is scary because you think the pyramid does bring stability and order of a type. It's just not the only kind of stability and the only kind of order. And I argue that this constellation also has stability and order, like the internet does, like Wikipedia does, like the biggest commercial organization the world has ever seen does, which is Visa, by the way.
Well, I want to, Matthew, can we come to, I'd love to do some of those examples, but there are a couple of points in the chat. One was from Carol Johnson about this question of giving away versus sharing power, and gets to the nature of your kind of idea of the constellation. And Andrew Girdwood has made an interesting point too about leaders and the toxicity of the idea of leadership today and being a leader. And I just wanted to hear from both of them and hear what you thought in response. Carol, I don't know whether or not you're there and able to, hello, good evening. I was really interested in your point about giving away versus sharing and what the implication is of who owns the power in the first place. Will you just expand on that for us?
Sure. The giving away language still kind of presumes that you're the one who has the power to give away to others. And I'm sorry, sharing language presumes that power. And if you step back from all of that, who's got the power, and talk about giving it away, then you make space to recognize that everybody's got potential in them, and that when you can connect people up, they can make power in ways that are really very fresh and much more mutual.
Matthew, will you just talk about that? Because I'm interested if you, and particularly if you've got examples from the sort of political life or business life where you go, okay, well, here's a case where we did see what Carol describes. Someone really giving away power, i.e. understanding that that person had the power in the first place, that kind of recognition. Yes. What examples that you'd cite for that?
I mean, the business one that is remarkable is, I bet nobody here has heard of Dee Hock, who's the guy who came up with what we now call Visa, which is the biggest commercial organization. I don't know, however many trillions, it changes. For the book, I finally just had to pick a number because it keeps growing. But you have Bank of America, which was a big bank then, giving up and taking this leap into a system where the little mid-level bank, at which she was a mid-level manager in Washington State, one didn't have any more power than the other in this new system. And that's pretty remarkable, I think. I think you saw it in the Obama campaign, where the crown jewel of a campaign is the voter file, and the leap the campaign made to let just regular volunteers who didn't work for the campaign have full access to that and treat them and trust them like paid staff, which sounds sort of normal now, but it was weird. And originally the campaign said no. So I think, to Carol's point, I think she's exactly right. And the point of giving away power, it's like, it's a little misleading in the title, but I mean, you give it away to get it back again, to give it away again, because as Carol says, groups of people make the power. It's not, forget what science says about the conservation of energy. In the realm of human affairs, we all know this. Get together with any people and you can see power and energy and initiative either kindled and created or smothered and killed. It happens all the time.
Can you, sorry, Matthew, go on.
No, go ahead.
I just thought it'd actually be quite useful for people to hear from you what happened in 2006 to 2008, from the beginning of your relationship with Barack Obama in through the campaign. And if in fact what you did and what you learned, and then how it informs the argument or the idea at the heart of the book.
The moment, I guess, this maybe picks up on an earlier comment from one of the members about leadership and how that word is so loaded and so often sort of cringy. So President Obama comes to Louisville, Kentucky, where I'm dialing in from now, my adopted hometown. 2006, he's on the cover of Time magazine, like, this man might be our next president, but he hadn't declared that he was running for president. And so we did a big free rally, and 5,000 people came to our minor league ballpark. It was really amazing. And then we did a fundraiser for him for the Senate, because he wasn't running for president yet. And then the next day, he spent the night and he was going to go meet Muhammad Ali, a great Louisville native. But the schedule changed, so he had a free hour in his block, and I assumed he'd catch up on his BlackBerry. But he said, "Matthew, do you have any Republican or independent friends, or friends who didn't think a big Democratic rally was their cup of tea?" And my wife Brooke and I was like, "Sure, we have plenty of friends like that." So we had no warning. We gathered, I think, 12 people around the table, and he went around, and I was just watching what he did, and I had just met him the day before, and so he goes around, and we spent probably less than an hour, and he basically just asked everyone about their hopes and fears and taken notes. And at the end, and it's what I love about how you do ThinkIns, James, at the end, he sort of synthesized it all the way you're so good at doing. And afterwards, a number of the people said, "Wow, he's such an amazing speaker." And I thought to myself, he is. I'd seen that the night before, but he barely said a word at this session. He just really thoughtfully listened, and they could tell. And then, most importantly, a bunch of the people who couldn't come to that small impromptu roundtable, one of them called and she said, "Wow, did he light up the room?" And I remember saying, and I was like, yeah, the room got lit up, but not in the way you think. Not that, like, we know these people, right? These leaders who sort of take up all the oxygen and sort of beam at you, and you just sort of reflect their glory. Not at all. He just got each of us around that table to turn our own lights on. So that kind of leadership is the kind I think we need more of. And there's very particular habits that we can all do to do that ourselves.
Such as?
Such as asking people about their hopes and fears, linking it to your own, and then committing yourself to whatever that overlap is, and opening up to new possibilities. And yeah.
I wanted to keep the story going, because one of the things that
Please.
happens there, Matthew, and sort of, I'm slightly leading the witness here, as you may notice.
Great.
But there's an interesting thing that then happens, which is around, and it goes to Carol's point about kind of seeing the power of people, of the individual person, in a way they haven't seen. You know, it's not the case the Obama campaign, 2008, was the first one ever to think, you know what, maybe small donations could be quite handy. But something did happen, and you were central to it, and not necessarily by design, rather by argument. So will you just tell us what happened then when you did get involved in trying to fundraise? Because I think—
Oh, right, yeah. So what happened was, fast forward a couple of months, he does decide to run for president, and we said, we'll come back to Louisville and we will help you raise money. And so these two amazing women who I had worked on to create, Brooke and Carolyn, different Brooke and Carolyn, to make that big 5,000 person free rally happen. We had said to each other that night, if he runs for president, and I hope he does, how many of these people would want to invest in the campaign from day one? So when he did come, we went out and just started asking everyone. And we got, I think, sort of 30 people under the age of 30 to go ask if they could find 30 people. You get the math. It was $20 to come see him. So we get really excited, and we keep selling more and more tickets. And then the campaign calls me and they said, good news and bad news. This is my friend Michael James, who you've met. And I was like, okay, you could share good
only
news.
means one thing, right?
And he's
Yeah.
like, good news is, Senator Obama is going to come to Louisville on February 27th. And we were going to do like a typical fundraiser too, in addition to this $20 one. And the typical ones in America are it's like $1,000 a person. I mean, it's very expensive. Very few Louisvillians could ever afford that amount. But boy, does that money add up quickly, right? So he's like, good news, he's coming. Bad news is that he's only do one event, and that one event will be the typical fundraiser and not your low dollar one. And Michael knew how much I loved the low dollar one. And so I said, well, no, no, we'll flip it. Like, just do the low dollar one, and all the high dollar one people will just come to the low one. He's like, no, sorry. And so I hang up the phone and I'm really depressed. And then my lovely wife, Brooke, was like, you got to go to Chicago, because you should not volunteer so much time on this campaign if that's really the kind of campaign it is. You thought this would be different, and you should find out. So I go up, long story short, plead my case to David Plouffe, who's the amazing campaign manager. And he says no. He's like, look, we'll do rallies in the summer. And I was like, this is not a rally. These are fundraisers. And getting anonymous sort of online donations, to your point, late in the game, that's not new. But getting people invested early and letting them invest $20 it's like farming, it will multiply and multiply, please. And he said, no. And he said, you look really bummed out, man. I was like, I am really bummed out. And I'm just trying to figure out how we're going to give 3,200 tickets back. It's like, you've got to be kidding me. You've already sold 3,200? I was like, yeah. He's like, oh my gosh, that's amazing. Go for it. So we did. And then we started doing those all over the country.
And you talk about farming, right? Why do you say it's like farming?
Well, I borrowed that. I read Seth Godin's blog, who's a great business blogger. And he was talking about marketing. And he said there's two approaches, hunting and farming. And it stuck with me. And I think he used the analogy of deer hunting or something. It's like there's 10 deer, and if you shoot at one, best case you get one, 9 others run away. That's sort of the math of farming. He's like, but the math of...
The math of hunting.
Sorry, that's the math of hunting.
Yeah.
And that is, I mean, most fundraising, I have a whiteboard here, I won't draw on it, starts with a pyramid, right? And like really rich people, and then really pretty rich, and all the way to the bottom. And that's this kind of a hunting. And then farming says, hey, look, plant seeds early, and they'll produce fruit and more seeds, and it's basically the difference between division and multiplication. And this all might sound kind of abstract, but if you go back to that first few months of the campaign, it's the Clinton campaign against the Obama campaign and some others, but those were the big two. And the Clinton campaign started out with I think 200,000, maybe 250,000 potential donors, and they converted that into 50,000 actual contributions.
Wow.
We have some experts in marketing here on the phone. That is an amazing
conversion.
Direct marketing conversion, right? The Obama campaign had at best 10,000 names. So imagine that similar conversion on 10,000 names, right? But at the end of the first quarter, where you have to report these numbers, the Clinton campaign had 50,000 from their 250,000. The Obama campaign had 100,000 donors from 10,000. So fundamentally, farming multiplies by 10 and hunting divides by 5 in that case.
God, that's amazing. Matthew, I'm going to I wanted, I mentioned Andrew Girdwood's got this point about the toxicity of leadership. And I'm interested in that. Andrew, do you want to just sort of flesh out what you mean by that? And then I'm going to go back to Matthew on that.
Sure. I'm certainly not thinking of Obama. And in fact, I don't even think politicians, when you say leaders anymore, that's maybe a different conversation. When I hear leaders these days, we're back to Seth Godin and the marketing blocks. To me, the word leadership, and I immediately think of a tribe of very noisy people from the land of LinkedIn who insist they get up at 4 o'clock every morning to drink a pint of wheatgrass, meditate on a spiked map, and then employ 3 people from disparate backgrounds so they can boost their productivity by 200%, and all before breakfast. And it's an endless tsunami of content that the internet spits at me. And I really think it's turning the word leader into quite a toxic concept. They're small, but they're loud.
Matthew, what do you make of that?
Yeah, I mean, interesting. I hadn't heard, I mean, I do. When I first learned the book would be called a leadership book, and you remember this, James, I was like, oh, you know, and I had to just sort of accept the bucket that publishers, I guess by necessity, have to put things in. It's not how I would have described it. For some of those reasons. It's the reason I never wanted to use the word power. It just comes bundled with what I call just these pyramid assumptions. So pyramids is winning and losing, in and out, up and down, ranking, rating, sifting, sorting. It's exhausting. And I associate the word leadership and power with that. But once you start to see this other way of thinking about it, it can become the opposite and be incredibly energizing.
But what do you say, Matthew, but just to Andrew's point, you said something to me a few months ago about pretending is exhausting. And I've really thought about that a lot because, of course, we all do it and we feel exactly that way. Is there something inevitably inherent in the way in which you lead that you've just got to do a certain amount of pretending?
I'm sure I do lots, but I think there's the kind of pretending that is particularly exhausting is, and we're going to see it on display. I hope not. I hope we'll see both. I know we'll see both kinds of leadership at the G7 getting together in the UK. But it's that pretending you have all the right answers going in, pretending you know the destination you need, and then you just have to work backwards to get it. And I love that phrase, working backwards, because I think it is the backwards way of working. And so many other things, the internet itself, Wikipedia, Visa, Alcoholics Anonymous, all these wonderful, different, varied platforms that have been so wildly impactful, have in common that they don't work backwards from a set destination. They embrace the uncertainty that is just life, and they don't fight it and factor it out. They embrace it and try to make it a source of power and energy for whatever platform they're building. So that I guess is the kind of pretending. It's the tone of voice, it's the body language of pretending that is also so off-putting. And whenever world leaders gather, the press does their part by asking them, you know, will you fall in line? And it's just all these sort of awful terms, which is not how healthy groups of people trying to be represented here by the thumbtacks on the corkboard, you know, that's what a healthy group ought to look like. Not everyone all falling into line.
Well, I just want to take you, Matthew, for a second to a text you sent me, which is I should let everyone know. When we were starting Tortoise, we sat before we'd even really got going. We used to sit in this room and do business plan after business plan. I remember 47 iterations of this Excel spreadsheet. Then Matthew and I would talk on the phone and I'd say, well, look, here's what we're thinking about. And I remember one day saying, you know, and the idea that we've got is the business is going to sort of look like this. And just, you know, sort of Matthew, who's, you know, as you can see from this conversation, is not kind of naturally given to sort of stern looks, suddenly looked really uncomfortable. And I was like, what? He goes, I don't think we're going to do triangles. And I remember saying, okay, let's not do triangles. And I didn't really get it. And now, a couple of years later, whatever it is, 3 odd years later, Matthew, I get a text message like this from you, and it completely makes sense to me, but I think you should explain it to everyone else, which is, this is all the text message says. From the initial Super League press release, Joel Glazer, co-chairman of Manchester United and vice chairman of the Super League, quote, by bringing together the world's greatest clubs and players to play each other throughout the season, the Super League will open a new chapter for European football, ensuring world-class competition facilities and increased financial support for the wider football pyramid. And I saw that, I was like, okay, well, I think Matthew's got a view on this. So explain to me why you think that ends up being so toxic, and then just give us some examples of the constellation model that you think ends up being so effective.
Yeah, because it does weird things. So it's so easy to like point fingers, and I think Andrew's correct that like you could sort of point fingers like out there to annoying pyramids that squelch initiative and energy and are exhausting. The pyramid lives within each of us, right? And the way I like to test for this, if you ask 10 people, we could do it to this group, but I don't know how to technically do it. If you say to 10 people, what's the opposite of losing? It just gets them warmed up. They all say in unison, sorry, what's the opposite of winning? They all say losing. You say, okay, great. What's the opposite of winning and losing? Right, so 9 out of 10 of us say not playing, sitting it out.
Yeah.
1 in 10 say, now what the 1 in 10 say is always different. Playing, being, learning, living, laughing, all the other verbs that we actually value in life that don't lend themselves to winnings and losings. And then the happy part is once the 9 and 10 of us hear that, we're kind of like, oh, right.
That sounds good.
Yeah, okay. But if you think of yourself and you think of the world as a pyramid and your place in it, things like the Super League are inevitable. You will just constantly think that's a good idea because you will reinforce it to yourself. Others will reinforce it of you. And I mean, the Super League lasted, was it 10 minutes?
Yeah.
I think from 11 to 11:10. And what I think that story, and look, I don't know a ton about the details of any of that, but it struck me that what the pyramid in that case, and literally they just said the word, so that was fun. What they discovered was the power of not another pyramid, right? It wasn't like, oh, their consolidated power was met with some other pyramid. Welcome to the constellation of decades and centuries of interconnections and all this wonderful constellation-y kind of connections, small towns, big towns that have a power of their own. And you often don't see it. And in that case, you could like, whoa.
How does it, Matthew, can we do one example? I mean, you and I and Jimmy Wales have, taken a walk around the park in London. I know you've written a good deal about Wikipedia as an example. And I know you talked to Jimmy a fair bit for the book. What's the idea in that one case? How does Wikipedia, if you like, exemplify the constellation? And is it an example that itself can translate to other businesses, other organizations?
What I love about the Wikipedia story is, first of all, when we're at a dinner table together and there's some family dispute, factual dispute, and we all say, oh, we'll Google it.
Yeah. Right.
But what we're really doing is Wikipediaing it.
Yeah. Because
if we find some obscure blog, that's not going to settle the dispute. But usually the first result on something like that will be Wikipedia. But the story of what Jimmy told us and told our members at the embassy when he came in to speak to us is that it didn't start out as Wikipedia. And Jimmy made the same mistake that so many of us do, which is why I think the story is even more interesting. So he starts out, he's up against the richest company in the world, Microsoft, and one of the oldest companies in the world, Britannica. So he's going to go take on the biggest and the richest. And his business model is, I'm not going to pay anyone to produce content, and I'm not going to charge anything for people to use it. Who's with me? Right? It's like no one. But he had a small group, but they didn't start Wikipedia. They started a company called Newpedia. And in classic early 90s fashion, it was NU and I think capital P, Newpedia. Almost what you know today, but with a hugely important difference. He said, look, I'm the new kid on the block. No, I'm a commodities trader from Alabama. No one's going to take me seriously. We're going to have a 10-step rigorous process to guarantee that nothing is plagiarized. And at the end of a full year, they had only 18 articles on the website. And Jimmy got frustrated. He went and tried to write his own on his favorite economist. And he couldn't even do it. The 10-step process he created was so onerous, he was like, I'm out. Then a member of his team said, hey, there's this thing called Wiki. It means quick in Hawaiian. Why don't we just let people write a sentence if they want to write a sentence, write 3 sentences, write a paragraph, not write anything at all, just help edit other people's things. And we'll just kind of do it. We'll open it up and let everyone, we'll give away our editorial power and we'll let people contribute a little bit. The next year, 18,000 articles. And we all know where it ended up, right? 240 languages, 6 million plus articles in English alone. And so that I think is a great, that instinct to control, pyramid style, and then opening it up, not to chaos, opening it up with real rigor. I mean, if you write, I mean, there are mistakes on Wikipedia like there were in Britannica, but it is a self-correcting system with rigorous guidelines about what is allowed and what's not. And I think that's inspiring and instructive.
And tell us, Matthew, how this translates out of the world of business or tech and into the world of politics and geopolitics. I'm going to ask Sudhi Pigatin and Ali Bahani in a moment, but you mentioned the G7 a few moments ago. You know, you're a former US ambassador to Sweden as well as the UK. And I can't help feeling that if you walk into Foggy Bottom, if you walk into the State Department and go, guys, I've got a brilliant plan for the US, right? Let's start giving away power and seeing how that might work for us. People are not necessarily going to buy in. But is there, do you think, a read across in terms of US foreign policy to what you described?
I think that there was an amazing woman I got to meet who was the #2, I think, at USAID, which is like the DFID equivalent in the States. And I asked her, it was about foreign aid and, hey, shouldn't there be more coordination between who's helping so we don't leave people out, something like that. And this is when I was actually ambassador in Sweden, which was the most generous, I think, on a per capita basis, country in the world in terms of foreign aid as a percentage of gross national income. And I'll never forget it. She said, ah, yes, coordination. She says, everyone loves coordination and no one likes to be coordinated. And I was like, oh, that's brilliant. And we all know that feeling of like, nobody likes to be bossed around and told what to do. And so why do we expect that of leaders? All the language around the G7, I was on the BBC last night, like it's what they kind of want, like who's gonna win, who's gonna take center stage. It's like, what a ludicrous way of thinking about the configuration of those leaders and the job they have to do. They have to figure out how to make things together. Like make an approach to getting the world vaccinated. Like that is and to deal with climate, but just to pick on the COVID one, like this is gonna be hard. What is the likelihood that any one of those people is coming in with the right answer? Very unlikely. So it doesn't seem too much to ask that, hey, let's work through this together.
It's not, it's not, Matthew, it's not that people, it's where the thinking that applies in the world of the corporate, the tech startup, or even the social action group ends, and if you like, political idealism begins. Because the issue, and maybe I should just bring Sudhi Pigatin, because while you were speaking,
please,
Sudhi, why don't you make the point? Because your reaction to what Matthew was saying was different. Why don't you put your points to him?
Oh, I was just being snipey, and it was like you were discussing. It sounds like you were just summing up. You know, Boris Johnson's ineptitude is that, you know, he wants all the attention, but he doesn't want to take any responsibility. And that, you know, that must define, you know, a bad leader of a pyramid. He doesn't even, you know.
No, well, you did. And thank you, Sudhi. I was reading the Dominic Cummings testimony.
Yeah.
I should have texted James this one, because this is the flip of the Super League pyramid. It was, so I'm not saying this is true or not, but this is what Dominic Cummings asserts that was going on at number 10 when he was there. And basically the idea was,
it seemed utterly believable, hey, I have to say.
Yeah, well, he's basically said, Cummings saying, hey, I can stop the chaos. And then his boss saying, no, I don't want the chaos to stop because chaos suits me, because in a chaotic world, everyone has to come to me. And that to me that's the little mini pyramid within. So the alternative to the pyramid is not chaos. There is real order and structure to this other way of organizing and thinking of yourself and other people around you.
Matthew, just elaborate on that a second, because I can see that Stuart McKenzie and Cal Johnson are saying, actually, could you just elaborate on the constellation idea? What defines the constellation, and what is, if you like, constellation thinking?
So to me, the essence of Constellation is it is the alternative to, we all understand the pyramid, top down, bottom up. If you want to escape it, you can escape into the chaotic world that Dominic Cummings described, where you're just a million stars in the night sky. And it's, you know, and what I'm saying is this constellation is, no. It is, you think of yourself as a star, you look at everyone around you as a star, and then you think, how do I make useful connections between them, useful patterns that are more powerful than we ever do alone? And this can happen at your next Monday morning meeting. I mean, it works at any scale. And what's interesting about it is, and why it's confusing and threatening to some, it's uncomfortable. Because if I look up to the sky and I show you Orion's belt, I mean, that is not self-evident. You cannot see the lines. You have to kind of choose to see them. But once you see them, you can't unsee them. And that's why I was joking with James early in our friendship about, like, stop drawing triangles because I'm allergic to pyramids, because I've started through these other leaders to see this other way of looking at it. And once you do, you see all the power in it. Mm-hmm. And you want to start making more of them, and you want to start preventing the kinds of behaviors that prevent them.
I mean, and I should say, actually, Matthew, we had a thinking like this last week. We were doing a summit. Was it last week? Yeah, last week or the week before, on the future of work. And there was a member who joined us who was saying, actually, one of the interesting things about the future of work and the way in which we learn in the workplace is about how we learn from each other. And was saying, in fact, the thinking in essence is about how you do that, how you learn from each other. Yeah. And Katie's point always, Katie Vanek Smith, our co-founder, is always on about the idea that, you know, we talk about ourselves as a newsroom, we're actually an endeavor about understanding together, about how do you do that exchange. And so I think there really is something in that, you know, his point, and I'm not going to quote him exactly right, is that the really interesting power of the company is the way in which within corridors, within groups, you can learn from each other. And that is usually, I'm going to, in that spirit, I'm going to just bring in Ali Bohani, because he was making a point about the nature of politics and pretending. Ali, hi, how are you?
Good to see you, James. Good to see you all. Matthew, two questions, and I typed a point about pretending and that it's prerequisite for politicians, but I want to take you back to global diplomacy, having been a diplomat as well. Part of the power is the grace of when to use it and when not to use it. And taking back to the dollar note as well, US has been like my big fat Greek wedding, the father, it was applying Windex on everything. And for everything, US is applying sanctions. So dollar note and sanctions, how often should the power be exerted to who? And talking about authenticity and trust, when allies as well don't trust one another, how can that power be protected? Case in point, the rancor now running to the G7 and the Denmark and US issue. Where would you see the void in that space through the dollar note and the authenticity, and at the same time, when to use power? Thank you.
Yeah, it's a great question. I go back to where sort of Carol got us going earlier. To me, it works best when it is made together with this group. And therefore, when you use it after you've made it together, it feels a logical extension. It feels sort of healthy and authentic, to use the word you used, and I think it's the right word. And it is so, that is the magic, that is the true magic of these multilateral organizations that are easy to make fun of because they fall short a lot and they start to sound like an alphabet soup of things. But really, and when I got to see them, at their best, they are doing what James talked about earlier. They are making power together. And if you're not, and you're just sort of using it and you're trying to get people into alignment, to toe the line, you're doing the opposite. And I think the language we use as diplomats is hugely counterproductive. I used to complain early in our friendship. I was like, oh, I would have to go say there's no daylight between the US and the UK on, what to do about the civil war in Syria, or what to do, you fill in the blank. And what a ludicrous standard of cooperation. Of course there's daylight. And if you look at the world like a constellation, that's a good thing. Why do we want to be one big consolidated, and this gets back to the earlier point. So many leaders might be like, okay, maybe I'm a star, but all of you people just orbit around me. You're all planets, you know? And that's the way we talk about too much global leadership. And that's not healthy.
Can I just ask you, Matthew, Ali, thank you, a sort of different version of Ali's same question, really, which is about diplomacy. I'm gonna come in a moment to Zebedee Albi if I can, because he's got interesting points about leadership. But I just want to stick for a moment on diplomacy. And there's such an idiotic way that we in the media talk about your business in diplomacy, and particularly around the US-UK, right? I mean, there's a brilliant set of stories over the weekend about Boris Johnson's reluctance to use the word special in terms of relationship. I mean, how much more ink can be spilt on this ridiculous definition, right? But I am interested in something that you did that was completely different to sort of high sort of power diplomacy, which was touring schools in the UK, listening to students and hearing what they said and how that informed the way in which you then thought about your own country. How do we learn from people who see us from a distance? And I just wonder if you could tell us a little bit about that, because that does seem to me to be a different kind of diplomacy, a different kind of learning together.
I do. I mean, when the wonderful people at Pew Research did a report, it just happened to coincide with my arrival in London in 2013, and it was 40 countries. In 39 of the countries, young people, I think people under 25, had a higher sort of net positive approval rating of the United States. And a lot of this was attributed to President Obama, than their parents or grandparents' generation. And the one country that didn't, the one country where young people had a lower view of America was the United Kingdom. I thought, well, that's interesting. There's an opportunity. So how do you engage with young people, which is a terrible term that old people like me use. And the one thing I knew they didn't want to do, James, was hear a lecture on foreign policy from me. So my wife, Brooke, is an art therapist by training. And so I went, what do you call these things? Are they A5 cards? Whatever, this size, A6. And I would just hand them out, 100 kids at a time at sixth form colleges, and say, draw me a picture of something that frustrates you about America, and let's talk about it. So I have 20,000 index cards across the street in Kentucky of all those sessions, and 10,000 of them have a picture of a handgun.
Good God.
So half the young people either wrote the word gun or drew a picture of a gun, and it was always a handgun. And number two most popular frustration was racism, and number three was police brutality. This is 2013, 14, 15. And we spent all the time talking about those, and 5 minutes at the end, flip over the card, and it's the happy bit. What inspires you about America? Food, diversity, opportunity, wonderful things we love to hear as Americans. But I think it's appropriate that we spend the time on the disagreement and try to make that, or the confusion, that's where the energy lives, and try to work through it together. And I wasn't trying to win an argument with them, right? Because how many people like to lose an argument? No one. So we're not in the argument winning business. Mm-hmm. And that's how I approached it. I kept going in America, not at that scale. But this connects back to Ali's point. So I did it in America, and I said, well, what frustrates you about your own country in America? Same age group. Number one frustration, division, racial, social, economic. Number one hope, diversity.
Wow.
So diversity and division, the root is div. So what is it about separateness? How do you get the best of separateness, which is self-identity, without the worst of separateness, which is alienation? Mm-hmm. And that's where I keep going back to this constellation. What they want is to stand out as their own person and fit into something greater. and not have to pick like they do in a pyramid of either fit in or be left out. That's what the young people want. We have this great symbol on the dollar bill for how you can stand out and fit in. We should act more like that.
But it's so interesting. It's so interesting, Matthew, because when you say that, make that point about division and diversity, just think if your book had been titled Daylight Between Us. If the book had been to emphasize the fact that that was a strength rather than a weakness, actually it would have been replayed as US ambassador says, you know, widening transatlantic rift. You know, that would have been the playback of it. So it is a mindset. It clearly is. Let me, I'm sorry, I'm aware of the time, you know, and I'm lucky enough, I get to talk to you plenty. I'm going to come to Wenya Kawesha. Wenya, I think you've got your hand up. I think we lost everybody for a moment. So Wenya, why don't you weigh in?
Hi there, thank you, James. I'm a former Wilacker, so very pleased to see Matthew. Thank you for coming. I had a question around the point you made essentially about winning and the idea of working backwards. So I was watching this chess grandmaster, and his view for somebody who was struggling to play chess was, if you do a retrograde analysis, so you essentially imagine like where the pieces are when you win and work backwards, that can help people to overcome their overwhelm. If they're thinking, oh, I'm not confident, I don't know how to navigate this new or overwhelming situation. And also I'm a big fan of David Plouffe, and his book is famously titled The Audacity to Win. And one of the things about the Obama campaign was the actual sort of, the numbers, the voters, the electoral college, they were sort of phenomenal results ultimately that both the different campaigns achieved. So I guess what I was trying to do is kind of square in my mind this idea of winning and working backwards, and sort of that potentially being like whether it's empowering or disempowering, or if it's just a matter of how it's framed, that people are acting.
It's a beautiful question. Thank you. I guess I would say the pyramid has its place, and I'm not a chess player. The chessboard, literally or figuratively, may be exactly such a place. I think wartime, it makes for good drama. It just shouldn't be our default setting, which is, I think, what it's become. And to David Plouffe, who I'm a huge admirer of, I was the national finance chair in the re-election campaign. And I will tell you, there was so much magic in that first campaign, 2008. It felt like surfing a wave. Lots of people use that. You're just sort of like, oh, you're on it, you have your part, but it's bigger than you, just mixing metaphors here. The 2012 campaign was a slog. It was like swimming back out against the waves. There was no joy and no magic. And the field team that I write about in the book, Buffy Wicks and Jeremy, these amazing people who built this beautiful model of volunteer energy that was a big part of the victory. Their team was renamed in 2012, and it was called Team 270, just to make it crystal clear that the goal was to get 270 electoral votes and work backwards from there. And we talked earlier about hunting and farming. And the truth is, that all we needed to do was hunt. We could get a subset of voters, a subset of donors, a subset would suffice. And so we got what we asked for. We got victory, which was great. I'm really glad we did. But it was not energy producing. It wasn't any of the magic of the first time. And even the campaign slogan, which was not invented by Obama himself, but the team in Iowa, and they wrote it, and then it became everywhere: respect, empower, include. Right? That's just lovely. Respect, empower, include. You don't even have to, everyone gets what that means, right? And everyone did their best to bring that mindset and that attitude and those habits to every encounter. In the re-election campaign, they had a huge poster when you walked into the headquarters in Chicago, where I was, and it said respect, empower, include, but we couldn't resist ourselves. We added one more word. Do you want to guess what it was? Win.
Oh.
Yeah. And it's like, we just had to write it out in all caps. And it's like,
that's what you're going to read.
So it's good for a finite task. It's not good for things like marriages, relationships, careers, parenting, all the things that are hugely important and are not winnable.
Matthew, I just want to, thank you for that. I want to just bring in two people with very quick thoughts. I want to bring my colleague Gajinder Dhaliwal because he makes a point about WILE UK and about how the giving away power really does work. And I wanted to bring in William Jeremy, who had a point about the nature of leadership. William, I'm going to go to you first and then to Gajinder.
Yes, Matthew, I think it's a brilliant both analysis about the power of leadership in a new frame, but it also reframes all we can find inspiring about great leaders of the past. And it seems to me to be both about King Arthur and his round table, and it's about Nelson Mandela and extraordinary transformative leadership he had. And it's also about the late Prince Philip and his convening power and his Duke of Edinburgh as well. So it's about the heroes and heroines we all need. And that is what I think is very powerful about all that you're saying and indeed doing in Tortoise itself, which of course is a great convening power with networks and with people who know things and the whole idea of connections. So it's an extraordinary thing. And
well, thank you.
By the way,
love that. You've given me lots to think about with King Arthur and Nelson Mandela and Prince Philip. So thank you.
It's brilliant, actually, and also about the nature of convening. That convening in itself is an exercise. Gajinder, I just wanted to come to you because you mentioned something that I don't know much about. WILE UK. So what was that about?
Sure. Great to see you, Matthew. WILE was set up by Matthew when he became US ambassador, and it stands for Young Leaders UK. And it was an open platform for young people to join, and it was a mailing list, but also it turned into a great community. And the embassy reserved, I don't know, 10 to 20% of tickets for each event, which is normally for those who I guess are part of the establishment. But what Matthew ended up doing as ambassador to the UK is actually open this up to a whole kind of new generation of people. And I guess the State Department and the US Embassy is normally one of the most exclusive kind of organizations and very hierarchical. But what you did was phenomenal because you allowed us to meet kind of like-minded people, but also have access to people like Barack Obama and John Kerry when they were in town, but also leaders from within the UK. So we had a lot of business leaders and lots of kind of political types coming and speaking to us. And that was when I was a lot younger, but it was an amazing kind of experience and kind of provided me with a strong network and also ideas. And a lot of them I'm still in touch with today, and we've still got active WhatsApp groups and Facebook groups. So that's a great kind of legacy.
Gajinder,
oh, well, thank you for sharing that.
But Matthew, I want to ask you one final thing, which is, other than to point out that while you were talking, my colleagues have gone down to the mythological pub that is Cheers and Memory Lane, not least the discovery that Liz Mosley, my fellow editor and partner here, has discovered her inner true being in Diane. I just wanted to flag that up because people who know Liz will really enjoy that. When you step back from the book, right, and think then about constellation thinking in your own life, right? We all do these things where we talk about, okay, well, let's see what it would do in the State Department. What would it do in US geopolitics? How could it work in a tech company or a FTSE 100, S&P 500 business? But as a person, right, as just like you, when you think, oh, well, hang on, I'm getting a bit pyramid here, or I should try and be a bit more constellation there. Are there behaviors that you think of and think, oh, actually, I could be slightly different in the way I do things, and it would be a bit more constellation?
Well, so the subtitle is How the Best Leaders Learn to Let Go. And I think in the realm of parenting, I mean, I say this personally as a father, I think I will now be undiplomatic. I think our whole generation of parents are getting something wildly wrong. And I'm sure this has been written about and covered, but just not letting go and not giving space to amazing kids and the self-perpetuating, you know, just being a control freak parent is something I am and would love to become less of, and would love to live up to the subtitle and the title of the book as it relates to parenting. So any tips, most welcome there.
Well, listen, I have obviously the power of trying to keep on time is one book that I'm not writing, and is but I surely need to read, because I realize we've run a couple of minutes over. And listen, I really am grateful for you to make the hour, partly because I know what these things are like, and in the States there's just back to back and talking about the book, and you can go a little bit snowblind talking about your own ideas. But I think for all of our members who by definition are here because they're interested in you, interested in your book, but care about Tortoise, the chance to hear from you and talk about it. And I hope that what people see is that what Matthew talks about is not just a set of ideas that are remote, but for us as an organization, not least because he's our chairman, but for us as an organization, inspired a way in which we try and think about the relationship between the newsroom and our members, the idea of being an open and welcoming newsroom, but the idea that if you take to heart giving away power, if you take to heart letting go, it is possible that members can make the news, that we will come to a better informed, a better understanding of things, thanks to everyone that comes in on these calls and participates in Tortoise. And so it's a way of really saying, Matthew, thank you to you, because this book, the thing that you've written, is something that's in the heart of what we do. And it's because you helped us think that way. So I just wanted to say thank you.
Well, James, thank you for having me on. Thank you all for your wonderful comments in the chat and live. And I'll close with one thought, James, which the longer acknowledgement of James is in the acknowledgement segment of my book, but the constellation mindset is really three things that you have to bring to every encounter. And James, you embody each of them. Expect to be needed, expect to need others, expect to be changed. And I am changed every time I do one of these think-ins. I am changed every time I have a conversation with you and the Tortoise team. And for that, and for all of you who are part of the Tortoise community, I am most grateful. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
Cheers.
Have a good day. Good evening, everyone. Take care.
Bye, guys.